Welcome to Season 3 of the Weekly Fellowship Podcast. I'm Coach Audye.
And I'm Coach Regan.
We're here with you weekly to anchor and empower women to break cycles,
build resilience,
and rediscover self-worth
through practical insights,
faith-based encouragement,
and a supportive community. Hey everybody, we are back today and we have a beautiful guest with us today, RyAnne Carr. And Audye, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. And by good, I mean I'm hyped up on caffeine. I've been getting up really early and I've been going to bed really late. And it's been long days over here adjusting to life with two. And I think when one's crying, the other one isn't crying. And then sometimes they're both crying at the same time, but not all the time. It's a little bit of a mess over here. But other than that, we're doing
How
great.
many
How are
weeks old
you?
is your baby? Just so we can put us on the map of where you are right now.
Um, 2.5, almost 3.
Weeks.
Almost 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's where you are mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, all the things.
Yeah, we're doing
I
great.
love it. And then let's introduce RyAnne. We talk about you all the time in here. I don't know if you've seen some of that. I'm like, RyAnne Carr says, but tell us a little bit about you and about all the things you do to serve women.
Yeah, so I am from living in North Dakota right now. We have 5 kids and we homeschool them, and I coach and I love coaching. And so I kind of have 2 different niches that I coach. One is moms. I really try and make motherhood easier for them. So I'm a very practical coach, a lot of skill set and mindset training, because that's what helped me. After I had my 3rd child, I was really drowning. And I found coaching and I found just that skill set and mindset training. It was just changed my life, changed everything, and made motherhood so much easier. So now I try and do that with moms. But then I also have this other niche of grief. My husband and I will kind of get into our story, but we went through a loss 14 years ago. And so now I really get to coach women through any kind of loss that they're going through and just accompany them through that dark valley of death, and encourage them and have compassion with them, but also walk alongside them as they try to design their new normal. So yeah, it's very 2 different niches, but the Lord has called me to it, and it's been so fulfilling to see him use the hurt that we went through and to form it into something beautiful.
I'm so glad you're here. And we're going to focus on the grief aspect of what you do today. I have you in my back pocket all of the time because I'm the age group that you coach. I have a lot of mom friends, and being Catholic, I have a lot of mom friends with a big family. And being in the Bible Belt, like a lot of Christians around here have big families, and I know you do such a good job coaching them. So I always think of you whenever I'm just listening to their struggles or listening to them work, try to figure that stuff out. But the grief aspect, some of my clients have worked with you whenever they've had a loss. I got to be loved on you when I had a loss. And it's you are such a gift to the Rising Tide Fellowship, all of the women in there. And I'm ready to be able to have you in my back pocket for grief too. I just had a friend who's more of an acquaintance, a friend of a friend, who lost her dad, and I just thought I just want to be able to hand RyAnne to you. And so that's kind of what I want to do this episode is let all of my friends and family get to know you, and then we'll give them your resources so that they can just have you in their pocket when they need you.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's just kick it off a little bit and just kind of get talking about what grief is and why it feels so different for everybody.
Yeah. So grief is really just, when we have that deep sorrow that comes from having lost someone we love, but it's so different for everyone because everyone is fundamentally different, right? We're all created very uniquely. We have different DNA. But then I think how your loss affects you depends on how old you are, the age you're at, how able you are to not bounce back. I don't even like that word, but your circumstance, right? Think of a widow who loses her husband at age 98 after a very full life. That's going to be a much different loss than a widow who is 32 with 3 young kids. So I just think life circumstances play into it so much. Your temperament plays into it. So that's why grief looks so different. but it is so unique to everyone. It's as unique as your fingerprint. That's what I like to say. That's why I like a one size fits all. Doesn't really work. And I know a lot of people are probably familiar with like the five stages of grief, like denial, and I don't know, the things we were taught in psychology class in high school, right? There's just five stages of grief and that's it. And the more I come to understand grief and kind of study the grief gurus, if you will, they kind of just dismiss that and say no, there's lots of different parts of grief, and we can't just say these are the five steps and once you go through it you're done, because it just doesn't work like that.
Hmm. That sounds, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think you helped me through a miscarriage this year early. Well, not this year, this last year, early at the last year. And, you know, I almost felt guilty because
Mm-hmm.
I'm walking alongside people who lost a husband, who have bigger, you know, feel what feels like bigger losses. And it is just so freeing for me to have talked to you, and you just like you validated all of my grief, and it
Yeah.
felt like that's I think I would have had much more grief if you didn't validate it for me and say, yes, that's real, yes, you get to
Mm-hmm.
feel that.
Yeah.
Audie, what
And
about you?
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan.
Oh no, I just yeah, we just can't compare losses, right? A loss is a loss is a loss. That's what we say, my husband and I, when we do some couple work, and it's just if with the more we try and dismiss it, the more it actually makes it bigger. You know, it's like nope, I'm not going to stare at the elephant in the room, but the elephant is still in the room. Whether you had an early miscarriage or you lost your spouse or your mom or whoever it is, yeah, the love is still there. And especially with grief too, our particular loss was pregnancy loss, so there's a lot of things that go into that. You lose a lot of the future, you lose your hopes, your dreams, the first day of kindergarten, the first dance at the wedding. I still get teared up at weddings when I see the mother come, dance with the groom, and I think, gosh, I'm never going to get that with him. So there's a lot of like that forward grieving almost, if you will, instead of like the memories, if you were to lose someone that you had spent 32 years of this life with. But it still counts, like it all counts, because it all tears our heart apart, and in a way that's so beautiful because we loved. Like grief is just that sign that we love deeply, so to not be ashamed of it. But Audie, yeah, I'd
Mm.
love to hear your experience with grief. Audie, I know you had lost a sister when you were younger.
Yeah, I did. I lost a sister. I think I was 8 years old. And she passed away. She was born just slightly early, and she made it about 5 hours. She had quite a few complications. But yeah, I really resonate with that. And as I've stepped into like the trauma and abuse space, like and grieving like people who are still living, and in that scenario, I find it so interesting. You guys are talking about comparing the grief or comparing the losses, but you're also like I've definitely found myself comparing like my grief doesn't matter, like who I'm grieving, who's living, like doesn't matter because other people have lost, like they're just gone, like that's different. Um, and so I don't know. I find that whole aspect of grief in general interesting because it's something that we experience in so many things. And I think that I don't think that again, we go back into that comparison mindset of like, well, mine doesn't matter because there's other bigger things
Mm-hmm.
going on. And like, yeah, that's true, but like that's going to be true for everything. And just like the experience you guys had with each other of like validating Reagan's grief, like that is just so beautiful and that's needed. And otherwise, it's going to turn into more grief.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ryan mailed me a really beautiful handkerchief, and I know that's something that you do for a lot of women who have miscarriages. And it's such a simple and huge testament. And my neighbor actually, I have a lot of neighbors, so I can say that with anonymity, but one of my neighbors actually had a miscarriage around the same time, and everyone in her life said, don't cry, you'll have another baby, don't cry, don't
Mm-hmm.
cry, don't cry, don't cry. And so we grieved so differently because she wasn't allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am
Mm-hmm.
receiving bracelets with baby feet on it, and
Mm-hmm.
beautiful cards and prayers, and people offering spiritual bouquets for me, and this beautiful handkerchief. And my neighbor is suffering silently with people saying, don't worry about it, don't worry about it, just let it go, just forget
Mm-hmm.
about it, don't do it. Like
Yeah.
what's that gonna what's the problem with that?
Yeah, I think and it's so common because I mean you see it, in pregnancy loss we see it, but then we also see it too if someone, lived this full life and died at the end of their life. They're like, "Oh, they lived a full life, don't be sad that they're gone, be happy for the memories made," and that's just another way. I think we just are so scared of feeling it, really feeling the sadness. I love that movie Inside Out, like no one wants to be around sadness, that emotion. And it's so true with grief because that's what shows up on your front door is just a whole lot of sadness. But yeah, if we don't grieve it and we kind of just ignore it or shove it down or listen to what people say, like don't cry, don't go there, it doesn't get better, it doesn't go away. And actually this is just so interesting because our particular story was our son was stillborn at the very end of our pregnancy, so we were 38 weeks and 4 days after a perfectly normal healthy pregnancy. I didn't know stillbirth existed, I didn't know that word. And so I literally went to bed one night and the baby was moving, and then I woke up and he wasn't. And anyway, we had to go through the whole labor process and everything like that. But we were really blessed with nurses and doctors and this great organization called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep that comes and takes pictures and photos. But people that really rallied around us and said this baby mattered. And one of the nurses I was talking to, and she said, "You get this because women 50 years ago never got this." And so it was very common to just shove it under the rug. You would go to the hospital, you would deliver your stillborn baby, and you never talk about it. You would never get to name that baby. It was just so sad. And she said that they had done studies and that these women on their deathbed, 50, 60, 70 years later, still wanted to talk about the baby and no one let them talk about. And so through that psychology, I just feel very blessed to live in this time period that they started to say, like, maybe we should acknowledge what those people went through. And if we're going to call ourselves pro-life, I just think we have to. We have to acknowledge it. So, yeah, that's just interesting to me. It's always stuck with me that there were a lot of people that went before us that didn't get that luxury, I guess, if you will, to really talk about it, and can just be an example of why we need to share the stories, and especially in community. And I kind of want to talk on that a little bit too about like grieving in a community and why it's so powerful.
Yes. Oh, we'll so do that because community, it feels so wrong, but to bring sadness into other people, especially, I mean, the people that I serve most usually really don't want to be a burden to anyone else, and I know a lot of women don't want to, but I mean, my clients and me, we struggle with that. We're like, I don't want to be burdened. I don't want to be burdened. So we definitely would not bring sadness into a group setting. Um, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you can find those people who have walked your path. That was my story. Like all of a sudden you go through this loss and people show up out of the woodwork and you're like, you're getting emails and letters like, "Oh, I had a loss 30 years ago," or "I had one." And you're like, "What? I had no idea. I sit behind you at church every week." So I think when you're going through loss, it's important to just receive from those people that kind of reach out. Um, that have walked that path so that you're not alone, because they'll be the ones that'll tell you you're not crazy. Like it's okay, this is exactly where you need to be. But then I think also bringing it into community, like into a group or maybe your family that doesn't want to talk about it and things like that. I would just give yourself permission to show up how you are, whether that's sad, whether that's angry, and they don't have to understand it. Like permission to be misunderstood is just so big in grief because you have to walk your own path. You're the one that has to lay your head down at night, and really try to start that healing process. And so a lot of times they don't want to feel it either. They don't want to see you be sad, right? Everyone like loves that person, and so they're like, Reagan, when you're going through your miscarriage, I'm sure they're like, "Oh, we don't want to see her sad," like, but it's just the path. The only way through it is through it. And so just, I think the more we show up and acknowledge it and just say, "This is how I am, this is what I'm feeling," then that maybe gives other people courage to feel their losses as well.
I think a big thing that I hear across the board in every emotion, whether it's anger, resentment, sadness, grieving, is why would I? Like, it's just a waste of time to feel it. I'm just basically wallowing in it, and that's just being like that's not being a good person. I don't want to just wallow in it. So I know you've been in the pit of despair.
Mm.
Like, first, why is it good to actually go there? And I know we've kind of hit on that, but then also, how the heck did you get out of it, RyAnne? That was your first baby.
Yeah, as our first baby. So I think, well, it's important to go there because Jesus went there, you know, in the 11th chapter of John, when he goes to the tomb of Lazarus, it says, you know, the shortest verse in scripture, Jesus wept. And so, like, if he wasn't afraid of it, then we shouldn't be afraid of it either. But really, yeah, I had a friend ask me that the other day too. She's like, what made you want to heal or come back from that? And for me, it was just that deep conviction of John 10:10. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. And there's something about when you're in the pit of grief, you're walking through the valley of death, you're like, this isn't what I was made for. That was just my answer. I was just like, I'm not made for this. This is my new normal, you know, that everyone kept telling me, but I just longed for more. And I remember at one point too asking my husband that, just having a really hard grief day and asking him, what's the point of trying to learn to live again? And he said, if we have hope in eternity that we're going to live for eternity, then we have to practice to live that way now. And I just was like, okay, I got to keep practicing how to live. And it's the hardest thing because before grief, I needed God for like the big things, like who am I going to marry or what job or this house I'm going to buy. And then after grief, it was like, I need Jesus to help me get out of bed and take a shower. I need Jesus to help me go to the mailbox, like just physically walk to the mailbox and walk back. And that's what I did for the day. You know, so it's just, it's an invitation to his tenderness, if we can see it that way. But there's a lot of layers, and it's just really hard when you're in so much pain to see, to find him there. You know, we just want to run away from it so much. I had a priest friend tell me, you're in a dark cave right now and you're desperately trying to get out. And what you need to really do is sit in that dark cave and see who's there with you. And that was really powerful. And so I just sat and just tried to listen for Christ, and he did show up. So yeah, I think that John 10:10, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. He doesn't want to, we end in victory. We don't end on Good Friday. We end on Easter Sunday.
Hmm.
That's awesome. Ryan, I want to share a little piece of my story. We started this whole um gosh, I don't know, maybe we had like 5 years of just like constant loss in my family, starting from when my sister had passed. Like I lost grandparents and uncles, like tragic accidents. Like it wasn't just like, oh, he had
Mm-hmm.
cancer for like however many years. It was just like, no, he was hit by a semi truck and died. Like there's just like this whole level of just like very traumatic events to the point where when we started with my sister's passing, like I wanted to go and my body thinking back about how it felt. I wanted to go and lay in bed and cry and just let like to wallow. But my parents were not in that phase. They were like, it felt like you punch a time card and we talk about her for like 5 minutes. We say her name, we do whatever we need to do, and then we pull that time card out. It's like, okay, here we go. Like we gotta like keep moving forward. And I like they were doing their best with what they had because they had just obviously lost their daughter. But there was a lot of missing pieces for grief for like the rest of the siblings. And so that kind of just like I want to say it kind of like rolled into the way we dealt with grief, where it was just like, okay, punch card, one more
Mm-hmm.
tragic accident for our family to go through, and then we're able to just like truck along because that's what we do. Um, and that became like honestly part of my identity. And so the reason why I ask this or bring this up is like whenever I actually felt those feelings and grieved and like it was I don't know, maybe over the course of the last 5, 6 years, maybe when I finally was able to accept that. Um, it was difficult, but I had the support that I needed. Like I had a very like he wasn't my spouse at the time, but I had a great boyfriend that helped me kind of work through that. But I know there's a lot of like moms that are dealing with this loss that like dad doesn't want to think about it. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Or like feels like she needs to be strong for the kids or something like that. So what's something that like say you would tell my parents
Yeah.
maybe 19 years ago that they needed to hear that could get them to that point when they've been suppressing, like what can help us through that suppression? Because at that point, that grief, like we've stacked it. Like it's massively stacked. And it's a lot scarier than just facing that one loss. Now you're facing six and all of those feelings.
Yeah, the compound effect is real with loss. And the older we get, it's just going to happen. You know, we can't run from it. No one gets out of this world alive. And so at some point, we have to deal with it. I say now, fortunate. At the time, I didn't think so. I was 27 when we had our loss. And I remember another priest telling me, like, you're just so young for this, but it'll be a blessing. In like, not a blessing, but like, just you're going to be wiser than some of your peers because you've had to like deal with this younger. But I think, you know, I have a program called 100 Days to Healing, and so maybe I can kind of just talk about that because that's what I would have recommended to your mom or your dad. But really, we start with over the course of about 100 days, I work with the client and coach them. But we have 3 sessions, and the first one is called Face It, really trying to face what happened, you know. And we use the scripture verse from the Road to Emmaus. I love that one when they're downtrodden and they're leaving, and they say to each other, but we had hoped. They had hoped so much in this Jesus, and it just seemed like they had lost all their hope. So we really just try and face it, like what did you hope for, and what's gone now that your loved one died. And then the second session is Feel It. And that's where we really lean into that Jesus wept one, really talk about our emotions. But then also, that story is so interesting because it's Mary and Martha. And I love those sisters. I can't wait to get to heaven one day and just like, oh, sit with them. But you'll see it says, like in that scripture verse, it says Martha ran to meet Jesus, right? Because he's coming back after he's heard about Lazarus being dead. And Mary sat. And that verse got my husband and I through a lot of the grief because he was sitting and I was running. I was going to counseling. I was going to support groups. I had to go to the cemetery like 3 times a week. I had to talk about it with everyone, strangers. I started a blog. It was just like I was running around with this grief, and he was sitting. He still to this day has never gone to counseling. He's never done coaching. He just dealt with it so differently, and he did really deal with it. He took it to prayer. And he healed in his own way. It was interesting. One of the things he did to heal was he went back and got his master's degree in theology. And I think that was his way of really wrestling with God to say, like, what just happened here? But that scripture just gives you permission to say, I'm not acting the same way my spouse is, and that's okay. And we're not on the same timeline, and that's okay. So that's kind of the second session. And then that third session is Form It. And we kind of dive into Revelation. Behold, I make all things new. And just kind of stretching ourselves to say, like, could God be calling us to form beauty from these ashes? And kind of just diving in, what would that look like for each unique person?
Wow. You just carried me through that whole thing, and I had tears like welling up multiple times. Just especially with you and your husband, that's so true. And I know, because I know you as a coach, I know you're going to find limiting beliefs, you're going to find some lies, you're going to find all kinds of things that are just twisted and distorted and confusing us in grief. And again, because you've worked with a couple of my clients, I've heard one of them specifically say, um, like every time she talks to you, every time she works with you, she has a new like aha moment, like um, things that were making her really upset during this grief process are like things that she just kept getting stuck in, were just these concepts or thoughts like I'm leaving them behind if I'm happy or if I choose joy. Thoughts like um, I need to know exactly what heaven is like so that I can know if we're going to be together in heaven. Some of these like really painful things that just get stuck in our craw, and I'm sure it looks different for every person who's grieving, but you were able to really just like help them get to a spot of clarity and peace where they're like she just felt more peaceful after talking to you. And I want that for so many people who are suffering.
Yeah, and it's just so important, I think, to not do it alone because it's just like it is the dark valley of death. You're walking through the shadow of the valley of death, and you would never do that alone. Like if you were really going to walk through it, a dark park at night or something. And so to have a guide along the path and not someone to say, this is the way, you got to go here, come here, run this fast, you got to move on. We don't move on, we move forward and really letting the client lead, but companioning them. That's the word I like for grief coaching is companioning them, but also, I took some of the coaching as far as like designing a life of wholeness, and I kind of weave that into each of the face it, feel it, and form it to say, what does wholeness look like for you now? And, right away, it's like, it doesn't because it just blew up
Mm-hmm.
our world. But trying to get them back to wholeness and have that awareness that grief touches every area. Because I think even from the outside, we might think, okay, well, you lost your spouse, that's sad. You lost your soulmate, but you also lost the guy who takes out your trash every Tuesday. You lost the guy who mows your lawn. You lost your accountant. Like all these in all the areas we could sit. So I really take them through the different arenas of our life and say, how did the loss affect you in that arena? So they just have that awareness, and how do we put back the pieces? I love, one of the Hebrew words that Jesus I would always say is shalom, and it means may all the pieces of your life come together. And that's kind of my take on grief coaching is like, how do I get them to, pick up those broken pieces and so that he can put them back together? Because there's no doubt your life has been shattered, right? Like that's just what happens. But we don't end on Good Friday, we end on Easter Sunday.
Okay, so you're making me think, and Audie, just interrupt me anytime because I know I'm just kind of like taking notes here. That's so beautiful. May all the pieces of your life come together. That's like the definition of wholeness and what we do. Um, but I'm thinking, and Audie, you're probably thinking this too about like I'm sure that when we're in the middle of grief, wholeness and having like a life design, really designing a beautiful life, it's almost like I think I would probably just want to slap you if you're like trying to help me get there. And I know that my client who chose to work with you during the grief part just wanted to slap me when we're talking about designing this whole life again.
Mm-hmm.
And why is it important? Why is it how do we get through that of the
Mm-hmm.
just the anger about I don't even want to have a purpose anymore. I'm
Yeah.
grieving.
Yeah, I think time, that's why, especially with the grief coaching I do, I say often, I'm not a first responder. So I think my program is greatly suited for people who have been through a loss that are like 6 to 18 months after their loss. I actually don't really think you need coaching the minute you have loss. I think you need care, community, compassion. You need to be loved on. You need meal trains. You need groceries delivered. You need people checking in on you. And so you're just not able to really have that forward thinking or forward motion. You just don't want to. And so, yeah, I would say time would be a big gift. And you would kind of know, that's kind of, I got to this point where I'm like, okay, I think I'm ready to like not be sad all the time, but I don't know how to do it because literally I step out of my house and there's another trigger or there's another sadness thing. That's where I would come in as a coach to say, let's walk through that. Let's tackle how you're going to get through that holiday. Let's tackle how that anniversary is going to look. How do you want it to look? How do you get to design it? So that we're not just left victims all the time. But I do think it's important to sit a little bit in that victimhood. Like if we look at the crucifix, he was a victim. Like we killed God. He was the most perfect person. And a lot of times, like in my story, at least, I'm like, I was a victim. Like I just went to bed one night and my whole world exploded. And that's okay to kind of sit there for a while. But I think in time, we all get kind of tired of being there. We know in our heart of hearts this isn't the abundance that we were made for, and we're ready to let that happiness in, but we just don't know how. And so that's where my coaching can really come in. Like let's start to bring a little bit of order, structure, happiness, dreaming. I know it sounds crazy, but like we could dream, just a little tiny bit. So yeah, that's just kind of I think time.
I want to ask, because I totally see the importance of that as a coach, but something I'm like, again, winding back my own memories, right? And I'm thinking like, like for if I were to go through a grief or if I were to go through loss the way my parents had gone through loss, like I don't know because I was so close to the situation if I could particularly like articulate the importance of doing what you're saying after like allowing yourself to sit there in it and then like you said in your heart of hearts it's time like I'm ready. Um what's the importance of doing that for like your family, for your children,
Mm,
like for the people who are around you? Like what do we what do the kids take away when they see you sad?
mm,
Like what do the kids take away when they see you happy?
mm.
Um in that context.
Yeah, that's a great question. I wrestled with that a lot because we went on to have another child shortly after we lost Caleb. And, I remember going to my counselor and saying, and that's another thing I think you need right away, counseling. I know Audie's always a big fan of therapy and counseling. I agree. Counseling,
All the time.
care, community, those are the things that first 6 months to a year that you need. But I remember going to my counselor and being like, I can't like have an off day where I just cry all day in my sweatpants because she's going to see me. And she just said, and you're going to teach her how to grieve because if you don't show her, she's not going to know. And so, what are you going to teach her? Are you going to teach her that you can't grieve, or are you going to teach her it's okay to grieve? And I really took to that and just kind of still, have grief days. And my kids kind of know, like, mom's just in a grief day, and the sweatpants come out, and we order pizza, and it doesn't always look pretty and nice and neat. It just sometimes looks like standing, honestly, just holding on for another day. Just go to bed, like his mercies are renewed every morning. It says that in Lamentations. So a lot of times that was kind of my only hope that like, Lord, tomorrow might be better. If I can just that's a lot of grief of getting through the day, the hour, the minute. But I think if we don't teach our children how to grieve, I mean, it just we don't do them any favors. We teach them everything else, how to eat an ice cream cone, not turn it upside down, how to ride a bike, how to write their name. I wasn't familiar with death at all. So I spent like the first, 27 years, like I think I maybe went to one funeral. Like it was just not really talked about. And that didn't serve me well at all when we had our loss. So that's my hope, to just kind of teach them, like just see it as like, this is something I need to teach them. And they can see that you're sad and they're probably sad too, And so opening that conversation to let their emotions come out, and grieve together.
I love that. I love that so much because again, thinking about myself and my clients, the underlying thought would be, well, I'm going to traumatize my kids if I'm crying in front of them. I'm going to traumatize my kids if I'm like having a meltdown a whole day in sweatpants and tears. They're going to be traumatized. But you're saying, no, you're literally modeling for them how to grieve, and grieving is un it's a undeniable part of life that we cannot escape. And so either teach them how to do it or pretend that, I mean, we're gonna basically lie to them and say you never felt grief.
Yeah.
And then
And
when they
that's
get
just,
hit with it, it's almost like, Mom, you let me down.
mhm. Yeah, you didn't teach me. And I think when we have those grief days, especially, early on, you might have like a whole week where you don't want to get out of bed and things like that. But just you can still like life doesn't have to look like it normal like in your head, like it's not going to be normal. Your standard is going to be a lot lower for that season. So maybe not comparing yourself to that as well, saying like, yeah, this doesn't look pretty, it doesn't look nice, but it's still where we're at, like being present and like honest about where we're at right now, and join a
I feel
support
like
group
that's
too.
so true.
I was just like think,
Y- Yeah. It's the same like because we do that with like I mean I'm barely postpartum right now and Reagan and I have had some of these conversations where it's just like we talk about like where we're at in postpartum and it's great that like we can have those conversations but there's a lot of people that are like well I have to bounce back.
yeah.
I've got to get right back in there. Everything's good, everything's fine. And like that's just not that's not the way it
Hmm.
works. And it's not just postpartum, it's not just healing from something, but it's like it's healing from everything.
Hmm.
Like grief, losing someone, or like again, trauma and abuse, or you realize you're recovering from being a people pleaser. Like that's one of the biggest things. It's like, okay, I can't jump back into the lion's den. Like I
Mhm.
can't just run back into the fire and because I'm supposed to be able to put out the fire now. It's like, no, like you have third degree burns, friend.
Yes.
Like sit down. Like let's take a second and
Yes.
let's heal
Yeah,
first.
Audie, that is exactly my experience. I compare like our first year in grief. It was as if I was in a coma on a burn unit, completely out of it. Like it was just
Yeah.
I don't remember a lot of it. I remember it being terrible, and that's about it. But then that second year was more like when you wake up and you see the scars, though, and you're like, oh my gosh. Or like you wake up and you realize you don't have legs
Yeah.
anymore, or whatever the accident did to you. And there's, so much physical therapy. And then that third year was like getting sent home from the hospital with like the exercises to do. But then it was like, I don't know how to live life again. Like it's very hard. Okay, I'm ready to go back to the baby showers. I actually still don't know how to do it though. I don't know how to be happy when everyone's passing around paper, like baby stuff. And so that's where I think, especially me as a coach, I can help them with like kind of tips and tricks because we would love to take a year off and just lay in bed, right? But that's not reality a lot of times. And so like I know when I had to go back to work, one of my other friends who had had a loss, she was like, so you have a computer by your desk, just keep a Word document open and just type everything you're feeling in it all day long. And I was like, that's super helpful. Like, that's really great because it got those emotions out during the day. And I had another grief friend say, like, you need to schedule time to take a shower once a week and just cry. Just like cry, so that when you show up to your boss in the meeting, you're not going to cry then. Because we really need some of these strategic things because grief is just all encompassing. So, really working with the client to say, what do you need help with? What's coming up in your life this week that's going to be hard or you think might be kind of a derailing moment? And how can we kind of strategize around that? To get you up and moving again, right? It's like that first year, second year, third year in the hospital kind of vision.
I love those helpful tips. Every single time we talk to you about grief, which we've done many times in the Rising Tide Fellowship through your live events and the trainings that you've done, every time I'm like, wow, I just learned so much more. And I think I like to avoid this topic. I really do. I'm like, I love RyAnne. I don't love this topic. And that's just, I think that's how a lot of us feel because again, I don't want to be around sadness, right? I want to
Yeah.
avoid her. But yeah, I'm thinking about all the resources that if anyone who hears this and is like, yeah, I might be ready soon, or I might need that at some point. One, we'll have your 100 days to healing. Is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then we have a couple of your trainings in the Rising Tide Fellowship.
Yep.
We'll link all of this on in the show notes. And then you also run a grief corner in a space inside the Rising Tide Fellowship where people can connect with you about whatever they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Am I missing anything?
Yeah, and I also just have a little pamphlet called A Beginner's Guide to Healing. So if you're brand new, you've just had a loss, you can just keep it in your purse. It's got scripture verses, it's got quick tips, just really how do I function again amidst
That's
all the
right.
heaviness.
That's right. I forgot that I've read that and I've shared that with people. So yes, we'll have that on the website too. So all
Oh,
of that
and
will be
yeah,
linked.
the coaching, whenever I come up to coach on Thursdays, you can always bring the grief questions and concerns and things like that to community coaching hour.
Yes. And I don't know, have we talked about community coaching hour, Audie in here? I might just
I
share.
think we've touched on it. We've touched on it a couple of times, but yeah, we could definitely, if you want to hear more about what that is and how we're coming up on almost a year of it.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's crazy. So inside the Rising Tide
I know.
Fellowship last summer, we thought, let's Audible, let's do something kind of fun for our members and give them like really expensive coaching. And let's just give it
Mhm.
to them. Let's just do it every Thursday for an hour at noon Central. And we're like, just for the summer. But it was so fruitful and so beautiful that
Mhm.
we just decided to keep it. So we're coming up on doing this every Thursday for a year. So really high quality
Yeah.
coaching from Audie, RyAnne, and myself. One of us will be there, or multiple. Many of us will be there, and we just give you an hour to come in with whatever you have, even if it's nothing. And that's what I love too. A lot of women come in with just nothing, like I don't know really why I'm here, and I'll ask a few questions. Or you guys, RyAnne, you start with the litany of humility,
Trust.
trust,
Trust.
litany of trust. And just slowly just peel back those layers, and suddenly I'm like, oh wow, I know what I need to talk about. And so in the community coaching hour, you can also bring any grieving questions or concerns, anything really, anything that's going on, and we'll just help you through
Yeah.
it with
Yeah.
high-end coaching at a super affordable price.
Right.
RyAnne, thank you so much for being here today. Does Audye or RyAnne, do y'all want to close us up by any final thoughts?
I have no final thoughts other than this was really good. Um, I just thank you, Ryan, for coming. Again, we're so blessed
We
by
are.
you every single time we talk to you. And so thank you for coming
Oh,
today.
thank you. Yeah, I'm just grateful that you guys are willing to step into it because it is so dark. And there are times when I just don't even want to touch it either. It's just like, no, life is going pretty good. That happened a long time ago. My heart aches for those women who are going through it right now and who don't have a guide. And that's really what I want to be I just want to be their companion, their cheerleader, their guide, their encourager, that person who can plant those seeds of hope to say, it's not always going to be this hard. Because that's what I needed along my journey. So I'm excited to
Oh,
see, the fruits of this.
you're making me think of all the things you said in some of those other talks that we've recorded, and the
Mm.
Harriet Tubman quote is coming out here now, and I'm like, guys, go listen to these. You got to get in there, and it's in the training. It's in the library training in the Rising Tide Fellowship, and they are so 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 good. So
Yeah.
thank you for coming, RyAnne.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Weekly Fellowship Podcast. If you'd like to work with Regan, you can learn more about her on her website at reganclementcoaching.com.
And if you'd like to work with Audye, you can find her at audiegonzalez.com. Season 3 is sponsored by the Rising Tide Fellowship, an online community for faith-filled women looking for growth. You can learn more about our mission at risingtidefellowship.com.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.